In Chapter 3 of Digital Detroit, Rice focuses attention on the Maccabee building as a space that holds multiplicities of meaning both for the city and for himself. He essentially argues that by assigning static, fixed meanings to space, we simply end up back in the unproductive grand narrative, divorced from the personal and social potentialities of meanings. Rice draws on the work of Henry Lefebvre in comparing space to a kind of container. Lefebvre calls into question the practice of looking at space in this way, defining it as a unified object. Space can never be such a thing. As we look closer, the container is always already too small to contain all the spaces and complexities. The container will always overflow. The container metaphor is appropriate as it illustrates the inherent exclusion in such a view. He refers to Morell's comprehensive history of the decline of Detroit's educational system that never once mentions the building space that was at its very heart. By trying to put the place in a container, there is only so much room for things before things begin to spill out. In order to move away from this perspective, we need to begin to look at spaces as something different, something that is not and cannot be a unified whole. In the case of the Maccabee building, it is the place of a secret society, a place of the DPS, a place of Wayne University, and a place with multiple personal meanings for Rice. In this way, it pushes back against definition. Rice imagines his connection to the Maccabee building as technological, its multiple histories aligning with personal experience through his own use of the place as a professor of digital literacy. Conductive thinking is going on here. Linkages that are not immediately apparent are exposed through nonlinear modes of thought. This returns us to the notion of the network. The Maccabee building becomes resituated within the complex network and becomes more than just a building. As Rice states, it becomes reshaped as the city itself. This is not the city of the grand narrative, however. It embraces the meanings of the many, and it begins to build on its own. This perspective then allows us to make a transition from the notion of physical space to that of digital space. Rice views the building through the lens of its history and his own personal experience. He understands it, as only he can, as a site of educational struggle, and through that lens he begins to expose converging points within the network. Therefore, spaces cannot be defined by their essences, but rather how the space interacts with itself and those who occupy it. These places are not fixed, they shift and are constantly on the move. They become dynamic interfaces that offer connectivity to pluralities of meaning for the unique individuals who encounter them. The building is part of a network, and an interface then operates as something more than an information highway. The key component here is the connectivity. The building becomes the location of the convergence of multiple nodes on the network, with each node leading to another, and often taking off on unpredictable and surprising paths. Looking at space in this way reminds me of my experience with the Bloomberg Corporation in New York City. They long ago recognized space as network. Their entire building was laid out in such a way that departments that commonly work together were positioned the furthest apart. The reason was to force employees to navigate and interact within the organizational network as a whole. In this way, the Bloomberg building was something other than just office space. It became an organic network where individualized bodies/databases circulated throughout the network, relaying information in complex and overlapping patterns. It resisted logical organizational patterns and became an interface of connectivity. Rice notes that thinking in traditional modes of logic has failed to do anything to substantially change Detroit for decades. These modes of thinking only serve to further perpetuate the grand narrative of the decaying city. Mapping Detroit using these new conceptual frameworks offers a way to approach and address place, space, and the issues that are inextricably connected to them. To explain these new maps, Rice borrows from Catherine Harmon's notion of maps of the imagination. Non-traditional and non-logical, these kinds of maps offer a path to alternative constructions. They are maps of the network, utilizing both the public and private connections between spaces to expose the hidden problems between them. We are mired in our desire to perpetuate what Henry Lefebvre calls the urban illusion. That is to say, we are desperate to believe that logical order will save us, even though it has so often failed in the past. Cities as places are not made up of compartmentalized entities laid out on a grid. They are all interconnected and interact in odd ways. Whether it be Rice's Detroit, Ulmer's Miami, or even our own Clemson, these networks are always unstable. They shift, move, and in fact dance within their complex interconnectivity. We see it every fall on campus. Monday through Friday, we occupy a respected institution of higher learning, but on game day, we occupy a massive party. Rice argues that the foundations of literacy, the written word, set the tone for how we have come to look at space. Just as we like to believe words laid out on the page come to have a unified meaning, so too do we think of the city. The interface is stable and unchanging. We think we know how it works, and we think it is always the same. But as we know, this is a myth. Language most certainly does not work in this way. We are not the masters of it. It is the master of us. Spaces and places are the same. No matter how hard we try to ascribe stable meanings to them, they resist and defy us at every turn. They are fragmented, just like we are, and forever negotiating the gaps and fissures to produce new configurations. The information we receive is then nearly always disjointed and incomplete. We need to fill in the blanks somehow to come to an understanding. The interface allows us an opportunity to do that. However, what the interface will not allow us to do is to achieve finality. It allows us to fill in some of the details, but we never get closure, or get close. We return to Ulmer and Electracy's notion of mood or sensation. Rice tells us that the Maccabees building as a space and interface is not a representational idea, but we can access it through the sensations it produces through our encounter with it. We come to new understandings through nonlinear conductive modes of thought. Through these new understandings, we can make the transition away from notions of fixed space and accept the dynamic nature of space and place. Multiplicities of meaning layer and interact, and in turn interact with other spaces, places to create motion. Through this motion, we find the gaps that we can fill in with ourselves to create unfixed meaning located uniquely within us.